Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of April of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. I'll remind you that on the 18th of March of 2025, the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and the President of the United States of America accepted the beginning of ceasefire on the objects of energy facilities, which means that according to the Russian calendar, this ceasefire ends within a week, on the 18th of April of 2025. And this is very important because after this date, the Russians will be able and will have the right to continue the war with Ukraine in the full strength. And according to information we have today, this Trump envoy Witkov arrives in Russia. He has already arrived, and he had already meeting with the representatives of the Russian Federation, and we expect, and their meeting between him and the President of Putin is expected. So most likely today they're going to talk a lot, and most likely today Witkov will ask Putin to prolong or to extend this ceasefire. So currently, we don't know for sure what the Russians are going to do, and Putin himself, whether he's going to accept the ceasefire, the extension of the ceasefire or not. But I must say that one of the most important Russian demand when talking about any kind of ceasefire is not to rearm the Ukraine. So this is the most important and the most strong demand from the Russian side. If you want to continue the ceasefire process, you should not rearm Ukraine. And you know that today we got very important update from the territory of Ramstein, the military base of the United States of America on the territory of Germany. And according to information we have, this is a record amount. Ukraine was promised 21 billion euros in aid at today's Ramstein, British Defense Minister. Also, Germany announced a new air package for Ukraine. We're talking about at least 300 missiles for the IRIS-T air defense systems and 30 missiles to the Patriot systems of air defense, which means that the Western countries are planning to rearm Ukraine significantly, and most likely the Western countries, the European Union, they know and they expect that the Russians, after the 18th of April of 2025, will resume bombing and attacking the energy facilities of Ukraine. That is why the Western countries decided to rearm Ukraine so much when talking about air defense. But the thing is, why we see this situation. The US and Trump says that he's trying to finish the conflict, but we see the continuous rearming. And the thing is that according to information we have, according to mainly to the Western media and pro-Western resources, the Russians are planning to encircle or semi-encircle the city of Sumy as a result of a large-scale offensive. And furthermore, according to information we have, this offensive has already begun. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians are going to get the significant number of missiles from their allies. The US sources report about thousands of missiles. So we see that there are going to be no ceasefire on the energy facilities, no ceasefire on the ground, and of course, no ceasefire on the territory of the Black Sea. So we are at another wave of escalation in Ukraine, which is going to happen most likely after the, let's say, Orthodox Easter. Furthermore, according to information we have, Germany announced another list of military help, the significant number of vehicles, additional military assistance provided to Ukraine, lots of vehicles, lots of rounds for munition, lots of missiles, lots of bullets, and different types of weapon or arms that Ukrainians most likely are going to use with one purpose: to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to finish their task and their goals. As for the situation on the ground, let's discuss in details. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction where the Russians continue their offensive. The Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Zhuravka. I'll remind you that yesterday, the Russians, more precisely the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians established complete control over the settlement of Zhuravka, and today we got report that the Russians improved their positions further in the southern direction. So we see that the Russians slowly, step by step, are moving further in the direction of the settlement by the name of Yunakiivka. There are still lots of job to do for the Russians, but they're moving and they're doing this job. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the village by the name of Garnal. This is one of two villages that left under complete Ukrainian control, and telling the truth, currently we have some doubts whether the Ukrainians control the village of Oleshny, because right before I started making this video, several very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians established control over more than 60% of the settlement. So very likely and most likely tomorrow by the beginning of the 12th of April of 2025, the Russians will secure this territory completely. But as for now, we are going to keep everything as is. And let's continue. So the Russians continue their offensive, and as you can see, we have changes on the ground. So for example, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of April of 2025. And this is the situation by the end of the 11th of April of 2025. As you can see, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over these huge territories. Furthermore, the Russians launched artillery preparation. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the positions of the 80th and the 82nd Brigades of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, how the Russians were destroying ammo depots, temporary deployment points, fire points, FPV drone control points, and the most important, in this video, we can see how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian, let's say, bridges, pontoon bridges, and different crossings that Ukrainians still used to supply and support their forces on this side of the river by the name of Psol. Once again, due to this significant concentration of fire, we believe that most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, we're going to start receiving first videos that will confirm Russian presence on the territory of the settlement by the name of Garnal. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Belgorod direction. According to information we have, the Russians are finishing with the village of Popovka. The source reported that there are just several buildings and constructions left under Ukrainian control in the southwestern part. We're talking about this area. The rest of the village is already under complete Russian control. The same situation is taking place to the south of Demidovka. The Russians are about to finish the clearing of the village of Demidovka, and then the Russians will start clearing the tree lines to the south of the settlement. At the same time, the Russians began bombing and attacking the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine on the Ukrainian side of the border in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Marina, Prokhody, and Turia. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with airplanes, with artillery, with multiple launch rocket systems. All these events, all these icons tell us just about one thing. The Russians are about to begin their major offensive operation with the purpose to improve their positions and to take as many as possible settlements and villages on the Ukrainian side of the border. So we expect a very huge escalation exactly in this point. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Oskol direction. As for the northern part, we stopped receiving any updates from this territory. And you know that this is very weird and interesting because during the previous week we received lots of updates of very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Monachirkovka, Kondrashevka, Topoli, and the settlement by the name of Kamyanka. But as for the end of the 11th of April, as you can see according to the map, we haven't received almost anything. Just regular, let's say, updates of reconnaissance operation and, let's say, drone duels between the Russians and the Ukrainians. But when talking about the central and the southern Kupiansk direction or the Lyman direction, we got a lot of updates from this territory. We see that the Russians continue their offensive operation, and today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Nadia and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the southwestern directions towards the village of Novosergeyevka. So we see that the Russians are trying to synchronize this, let's say, flank is trying to synchronize itself with the southern flank, where the Russians during the previous weeks managed to improve their position significantly. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians launched another offensive operation from Makeyevka in the western direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the village by the name of Grekovka. So we see that the Russians are trying to cut this territory into many pieces and then to handle with every single piece separately. Also, we continue receiving lots of updates from the Lyman direction. Basically, the Russians began preparation. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing the deep rear of the armored forces of Ukraine, warehouses, ammo depots. So the infrastructure of the armored forces of Ukraine they used to supply and support their forces in the southern Kupiansk or the Lyman direction. As you can see, according to this map, we see that the Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of this dam, through the village, through the river, or through these several, let's say, water reservoirs. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Donetsk direction. I'll remind you that yesterday the Russian sources published very interesting video. Not the Russians, but the Ukrainian sources published very interesting video. And basically this video shocked everyone because nobody expected that the Russians were able to do something like this. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to repel the Russian attacks, how the Ukrainians were using lots of drones, lots of artillery shells and rounds to attack Russian vehicles. But despite all the Ukrainian attempts, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to answer the village of Nylipovka. And today the situation continued developing not in Ukraine's favor. Basically the disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine continues. Let's discuss in details. Once again, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of April. We have colored, let's say, the outskirts of the mine. Currently, we don't know for sure the current situation in this area. The Russians, according to information we have, entered the mine. Maybe they haven't entered, but there are very heavy clashes for this territory. At the same time, we have colored the village of Nylipovka, where the Russians try to create a defense belt with the purpose to not allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces and reinforcements from the city of Kostiantynivka in the southern direction with the purpose to stabilize the area. And today we got additional videos and additional changes on the ground. First of all, we have marked this mine as a territory under complete Ukrainian control because we still haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control over this territory. Another important thing that today we got additional geolocations much further in the northeastern direction from the village of Nylipovka. So once again, this is the map by the end of the 10th of April and this is the map by the end of the 11th of April of 2025. So what's happened and what kind of video we have? So this video today was published by another Ukraine FPV drone squad, let's say group. In this video, we can see the same story. The Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking the Russian vehicles that managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt yesterday, and maybe today the Russians continue their offensive operation. We see lots of vehicles that were damaged and destroyed by the Ukrainians. In this video, for example, we can see a huge convoy of the Russians. We can see one tank and several infantry fighting vehicles moving after the tank. So today we have one geolocation that we got from this point. And furthermore, let's take a look at this video once again, and this is exactly the moment we are talking about. This is the vehicle, and as you can see, according to this video, the vehicle was already returning back to the territory of the city of Donetsk. So the Ukrainians attacked with drone Russian vehicle in this point, but the vehicle was moving from the northeast in the direction of the southwest, and in this point the vehicle was damaged and probably destroyed. So which means that most likely the Russians managed to break through even further, and maybe the Russians managed to establish complete control even over this territory, because most likely this is exactly the target of the Russians, to establish complete control, let's say, over this intersection of the road and the railways. Because if the Russians capture this stronghold, capture these trenches, currently the Ukrainians have no chances to do anything with this, because this is the beginning of complete collapse of Ukrainian positions. Because if this information is correct, the Russians control this, let's say, dense network of the fortifications, the Russians control these trenches, and the Russians control this village of Nylipovka. So, and this is obviously impossible, something impossible, and something that Ukrainians most likely will not be able to restore control over during the next days, because now the Russians understand that they control these territories. The only thing they need is to bring as many as possible weapons or arms using drones, and not allow the Ukrainians from this pocket, let's say, to evacuate themselves or to break through or to counterattack the Russians from behind. So once again, Russian vehicle was destroyed here. So as for now, we're not adjusting the map in this area because we don't have proofs. It's just speculation from our side. We're just trying to project and to understand from what position this vehicle was returning back. But we have colored this complex network of the fortifications because the Russians most likely landed some infantry in this part and captured this territory. So this is the situation, and summarizing everything, very likely that the Russians currently control something like this, and this is something like a defense line that Ukrainians now need to try to think how to break and to restore control over. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the fields. During the previous 24 hours, we have lots of geolocations that confirm Russian attempt to attack along the 0519 road towards the settlement of Deliivka. That attack was repelled by the Ukrainians. At least we have lots of episodes how the Ukrainians were FPV droning Russian vehicles and how they managed to destroy them or at least to damage. But at the same time, we have lots of videos that confirm Russia Russian control over this territory with FPV drones. The Russians managed to discover several positions of the armored forces of Ukraine of FPV drone operators and to destroy them. So currently there are very heavy clashes for this pocket, for the territory between the city of Kostiantynivka and Seversky Donetsk Donbas Canal, and this is probably the most important battle, at least of April of 2025. This battle will determine the future of the city of Kostiantynivka. Now let's move further. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation to the south of Kliban-Bytskaya water reservoir. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions in the southern part along the N20 road, and the Russians managed to improve their positions in the village of Kalinovo itself. This information today was provided us by neutral mappers. Furthermore, also right before we start making the video, the pro-Ukrainian sources also adjusted their map. We will discuss this during the next update. And according to them, the Russians indeed managed to secure up to 50% of the village of Kalinovo, and the Russians continue their pressure. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and as for now, they still haven't managed to stabilize the situation. And the package that was promised by the Western countries most likely will be used by the Ukrainians for one purpose: to stabilize the situation and not allow the Russians to break through the defense. And if the Russians are able to break through the Ukrainian defense, that can happen during the next days or even hours, then most likely the Western countries will launch the Plan B. And the Plan B is considering the deployment of troops to Ukraine for 5 years. So Western countries, of course, if they see that Ukrainian defense collapsed, they will not allow the Russians to reach even the river of Dnipro, and they will start sending their troopers on the ground, and this with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to save the Ukrainian lines and the Ukrainian defense from complete collapse. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. As for this area, we haven't received anything special during the previous day, just some icons, some FPV drone activities. We received more and more videos from the line between the city of Pokrovsk and the city of Mirnograd, very huge Russian activities, but without any changes on the ground. So we believe that Ukrainians are trying to save their weapons, their artillery shells, their drones for the Kostiantynivka direction and for the Sumy direction. They try to save as many as possible and not to use them for nothing. Also, the Russians currently launched the third offensive operation, and as for this operation takes place in the Novopavlovka direction, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions, at least from the northern pincer. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to improve their positions to the south of the village of Bogdanovka. In this video, we might see how the Russians were moving using these roads of attack. One of the geolocations was spotted here. We don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to move further, but we believe that as a result of this attack, the Russians managed to at least reach the Balka Arikhova. So the next, let's see what's a barrier. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the settlement of Bogatyr. During the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving lots of updates from the settlement, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the concentrations and the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, FPV drone operators' positions, and many other different important military objects. Furthermore, in the southern direction, the Russians continue concentration of their forces around the village of Shevchenka. So we believe that during the next 48 hours, the Russians will begin offensive operation with the purpose to answer the village of Shevchenka itself from the southeast, from the east, and from the northeast. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously something big or another breakthrough can take place exactly in this direction. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.